Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing? I see we have close to, what is it now? 800 people watching. Very, very good. Very fine and dandy. We only have 400 likes, though, which is inadmissible. So we got 800 people watching. We should have 800 likes. Again, the whole topic of this discussion is censorship. And, one way we fight the algorithm on channels like this, which are, not cooking channels or gaming channels, is politics. So we need you to like the video, comment, interact somehow. Now, you all know my guest, Scott Ritter. He used to be a United Nations weapons inspector. He's also a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer. And they have just banned him from Twitter. I'm going to bring Scott on. How are you, Scott?
Well, I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm worried. I'm worried about all this. Can I just get your initial reaction to why they booted you? I mean, I you know what? I'm just going to pull up on the screen quickly the message that they sent you. So this is, if you try to go on Scott's profile, and by the way, the last time you were on the channel, I was actually telling people go follow Scott. We actually pull up your Twitter. This is.
You're to blame.
I hope not. It says account suspended, right? And the message that they gave you was that you violated their rules against abuse and harassment, allegedly. And so there was a tweet underneath about the Ukrainian National Police. You said that they committed numerous crimes against humanity in Bucha. And Biden, in seeking to shift blame for the Bucha murders onto Russia, is guilty of aiding and abetting these crimes. Congratulations, America. We've created yet another presidential war criminal. So that's what they booted you off the platform for. That's the tweet. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, first of all, I'll just start off by saying that even though Twitter is, it is what it is. It's not the center of the universe, but I think it has the potential of being a very good platform for the exchange of ideas at 288 characters per go. I take it seriously, meaning that if I'm going to put a tweet out there with my name on it, it's, look, I'm as guilty as anybody putting out a dog tweet or a cat tweet. If I wake up in the morning, my cat's doing something cute and I took a nice picture, I have no problem putting it on Twitter and saying, hey, look at my cute cat. But for the most part, you can't go wrong tweeting about a cat. But when you get involved in politics, I don't want to be someone, I have worked too long and too hard to be someone that if I speak on an issue, on a subject, I want to be taken seriously. I want to be someone that people say, he's assiduous with his facts. It doesn't mean I'm always right, but it means I always try to be right. When when you're engaged in complicated issues, it's not so much about being right. It's about being motivated to promote the pursuit of truth. And sometimes the pursuit of truth is accomplished best when you put out an idea, an interpretation, an assessment that challenges the mainstream media or the mainstream direction, the mainstream narrative, and forces people to say, let me think, got to put on my thinking cap. And then they come up with their own opinion. Their opinion may differ from yours, which is a success because they have empowered themselves with knowledge and information derived from their own work. They're not parroting something somebody told them. Yeah. And to me, it's that process of debate, dialogue, and discussion that makes democracies viable, makes functional democracies possible. And so I view Twitter as a mechanism that encourages this process. So if I'm going to put a tweet out there about a serious non-cat or non-dog issue, I'm going to make sure that I've researched it, especially on a topic like Bucha and war crime. I can guarantee you that before I wrote down about the Ukrainian National Police being the perpetrators of numerous crimes, that I researched the subject, that I dug into various images and videotapes of the dead people. I assessed it using whatever forensic evaluation that one can in something like this. And I saw, for instance, that many of the bodies had the green dry ration packaging of the Russian of the Russian ration box, the
Is
one that
this
the Russians are handing out.
is this
For,
like MREs in the U.S. military? Meals ready to eat?
It's dry ration. Yeah, it's a ration pack. The Russian soldiers can get them, but they've also been used extensively to support humanitarian, civilians in need. You see the
Okay.
Russians in their trucks handing them out. I also noticed that many of the bodies had the white armbands on that signify people who are not a threat to Russia, and that the people that didn't have the white armbands had their hands bound behind their backs using the material that looked awfully like armbands that are no longer on their shoulder. So just a first brush, if someone said, okay, what is this scene telling you? The scene is telling me that these are pro-Russian or Russian sympathizers or people who have interacted with Russia, people who have been the benefactors of Russian humanitarian aid, and people who are heading in the direction of Russian troops. And so then you have to say, okay, who killed them? Well, I don't know by looking at that pictures, but if you're pro-Russian or Russian sympathetic, equipped with humanitarian aid provided by Russia, the odds are that the Russians didn't kill them. Now, that's not enough now to jump to the Ukrainian National Police, though. That's just setting the stage, the initial thought. But now I get the Russian orders. The orders from the Russian high command are to minimize civilian death, minimize damage to civilian infrastructure. So I see intent. The commander's intent going down to the Russian soldier normally would be translated into actions that reflect that intent. So if I've got some pro-Russian people coming at me, I'm not going to kill them. That's the intent. What about the Ukrainians? We have the exact opposite. We have the Ukrainian government calling anybody who collaborates with Russia, to include receiving these humanitarian care packages, are now classified as collaborators. And in the specific instance of Bucha, we have the Ukrainian National Police issuing a bulletin speaking of the cleansing of collaborators from Bucha on 1 April. We have a senior Ukrainian government official, a female, issuing instructions via social media, telling the citizens of Bucha that there is a police action taking place, a cleansing operation. Stay indoors, don't panic. She repeats this over and over and over again. And then we have videotapes that show these Ukrainian National Police, including some who are directly affiliated with Azov, actively hunting down and shooting people. So now when I look at all this data, I have to say it's more than likely that the Ukrainians are the perpetrators, because we have intent from their commanders saying treat all pro-Russian collaborators as the enemy. We have an instruction from the National Police that to carry out a cleansing operation. And then we have videotape of the cleansing operation taking place, which involves gunfire from a Ukrainian national policeman towards civilians who aren't wearing the blue armband. So if I were compelled to make a decision based upon this, albeit incomplete data, because I still, if this was going to go to a court, would need some forensic data to back it up. But the first brush is the Ukrainian National Police have done this. Now, why did I feel compelled to tweet? Because normally I wouldn't tweet with incomplete data like this, because it implies I'm drawing a conclusion that normally I would like to associate a lot more hard facts behind before I put my name on it. But the Ukrainian National Police are promulgating a story that says the Russians did it. The Ukrainian government is putting forth a story that said the Russians did it. The Western media is putting forward a story that said the Russians did it. And then Joe Biden got out and said the Russians are doing it. They're war criminals. And so I felt compelled to put a counter narrative out there saying, no, it's the Ukrainian National Police who have committed these crimes. And Biden, and the reason why I picked on Biden is soon after he gave that speech, that announcement, the Pentagon came out and said, hey, buddy, we can't corroborate anything
Right.
the Ukrainian government's saying. We're not saying it's false, but we're saying we can't say it's true. So the president of the United States is out ahead of his intelligence, meaning he's speaking. I won't use the word. He's just it's coming out from an orifice that isn't his mouth. And then so therefore,
This from Reuters.
I felt obliged to say, and again, I did the research. These words don't come lightly. I looked up the Nuremberg Tribunal. I looked up what a crime against humanity was. I looked for similar cases that were prosecuted against the Nazis, similar to what I believe the Ukrainian National Police did, and they constitute crimes against humanity. So that's what I said. I also looked up, there's a lot of Nazis that were hung by the neck until dead who never pulled a trigger, who never signed a document, ordering death, but they were perpetrators, they were collaborators, they were co-conspirators because of the actions they took. And one of the things is to shift blame away, to try and minimize the impact of the crimes, which is exactly what Joe Biden was doing. So I used my words very carefully, selected from the Nuremberg Tribunal based upon parallel cases that were prosecuted as war crimes. And so I didn't take it lightly. When I said this about Biden, it's because Biden's actions mimic those actions that were condemned as war crimes by the Nuremberg Tribunal.
I see what you
Everything
mean.
I wrote down there was carefully researched. I mean, literally that tweet took me about 30 minutes to research. Right. I don't know how many people spend 30 minutes to write a 288 character tweet, but I do that all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm doubly shocked that they decided to pick that tweet and say you're violating standards. In my appeal, and I wrote a lengthy appeal and I broke it down just as I explained to you. Everything in that thing is fact-based. There's no harassment. There's no targeted harassment. Because if you're
who are you harassing? I don't understand that. Like, is it Biden? Is it
apparently I was
the
harassing
victims?
the Ukrainian National Police and President Biden. It couldn't have been President Biden though, because if I were harassing the President of the United States, Secret Service would take down my door, visit me, pay me a special visit. The same thing with the concept of threatening violence. If I were threatening violence on the president, I'd be in jail,
Right.
as I should be. There was nothing in my tweet that implied a threat of violence, unless they're talking about being arrested and prosecuted as it says right there, that you're wishing or hoping someone experiences physical harm. No, I wasn't wishing or hoping anything. I was stating an opinion. That is, if you're a war criminal, you should be treated as a war criminal. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
I mean, there are people who've said that they don't even agree with what you're saying here or otherwise, but this just doesn't constitute, ban-worthy offenses, or it doesn't even match with what they're saying you violated in terms of their rules and, threatening violence and so on. So again, I mean, even if we, like, let's play devil's advocate, even if someone completely 100% disagrees with everything you just said and everything else you said, this tweet, it just doesn't fit the rubric that they've laid out there. And Scott, since we're on that, when we're talking about playing devil's advocate, what would you say if, for example, it was the Russians who did this in Bucha, and it was a rogue unit? Because sometimes orders from the top, they don't translate down properly. Every army in the world in history has committed war crimes. It's this unfortunate fact of war. What would you say then, that it was perhaps a rogue unit, or the orders didn't get down the line properly? What would you respond to that?
Well, there's two things. First of all, I would condemn the rogue unit. I wouldn't try to sweep it under the rug. I would say this is a war crime and they need to be prosecuted. But then people say, well, what did you say about Biden? I would come back and say, did Joe Biden know that it was a rogue unit at the time that he made his presentation? What was the data that Joe Biden used to make his statement? At least I've made a good faith effort to research, because right now you're talking about a rogue unit whose existence isn't known. Mm-hmm. You're talking about actions that haven't been documented. You're just throwing that out there as a devil's advocate thing. But if a rogue unit actually turns up to exist, it doesn't exist right now. It didn't exist when I wrote that tweet. Therefore, it wasn't part of the fact set. And so what I would say is, now that I've been exposed to a more complete fact set, I have done what any rational person would do and reconsider the argument that I made and come up with a refinement of the argument, which may in fact say that Russians are responsible and Russians perpetrated this crime and Russians need to be held accountable. But some people say, well, therefore you were wrong about accusing Biden. No, because unless Biden knew that there was a rogue unit out there doing this crime, Biden was guilty of exactly what I said he was guilty of.
Right. No, I was talking more in general because
I know. But let me get back to your generalities. Again, Twitter isn't about conformity. It shouldn't be about conformity. Meaning that to me, the best value that comes out of Twitter is when two well-meaning, educated people disagree, and then they engage in a back and forth. Look, I have a friend. He's a 30-year friend. He's somebody that I've known since my time in the Soviet Union. And on the issue of Ukraine, he and I are at loggerheads. He's 100% on the side of the Ukrainians. I'm not. But we don't sit there, and I don't say Nazi lover, and he doesn't sit there and scream, you autocrat supporter. We sit there and we exchange very well thought out positions where we explain why we believe what we are, and then we explain why we disagree. And then I wait, he comes back with his response, and then I respond, and we have this discussion. And at the end of the day, we haven't changed each other's minds, but we certainly have learned something. We've expanded our knowledge base, and it's a valuable, it's an invaluable process. And Twitter should be that. Twitter should be people. Unfortunately, it's not. Most of the time when people disagree with you, they immediately jump in and get into a name calling or belittlement or demeaning.
Yep.
But it, that's just the price of having unconstrained social media. And you learn to call those guys out and only focus on the serious ones. But if you use Twitter as a means to engage with people in a constructive manner, it's a very valuable tool. But here's another thing of irony. If Twitter had existed in 2002,
oh boy,
I would have been banned for taking the position I did about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. Think about that for a second. I'm not saying that I'm right today. I mean, I believe I'm right. But my point is, if Twitter applied the same standard that they're using today to silence voices of dissent regarding the war in Ukraine, then I would have been banned for telling the truth about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. And if anything should send a shockwave through people about how stupid and counterproductive this Twitter policy is, it's that. They would have banned the only guy, not the only, but one of the few people out there telling the truth. Right. Is that really the policy you want, Twitter? Is that really the policy you want? I think the answer is no. It should be no.
Yep. Just quickly, we have 2,500 people watching. Please make sure each one of you has hit the like button. Again, we're discussing politics and touchy subjects, so it helps fight the algorithm. Scott, I wanted to ask you, have you ever been in violation of Twitter policies before? Because what they do is like, I think some social media sites, they have like a strike 1, strike 2, strike 3 policy. Yeah. My impression is that this is the first time you've ever done something quote unquote naughty and they've just straight up banned you. Is that correct?
No, I was naughty once before.
Okay.
It was an exchange about Chelsea Manning, who used to be known by a different name. And I was discussing the legality of Private Bradley Manning's actions. And the reason why I used the name Private Bradley Manning is that I was addressing what this individual did at a time when that individual identified as Bradley Manning. So it would have been factually wrong and contextually wrong to say Chelsea Manning. I spoke of that, and somebody challenged me and said, there's a term they use when you try to deplatform a transgendered person or something. But
I think it's dead naming or something like that.
And,
right?
And I was given I think a 12-hour ban for that. And then later, earlier this year, in fact, there was a tweet written by a Polish politician who said, we need to, Poles need to cross over into Ukraine and kill the Russian invaders or something of that nature. And I said, if you cross over I said, feel free to, but understand that you'll die like dogs. And I was given a 24-hour ban for that one. Both of those I protested. Both I wrote explanations saying that I wasn't saying that I wanted to kill you. I'm just saying that the cause and effect relationship would be that if you rush that way, you would die like a dog. Apparently I wasn't allowed to say that, and I was again. So this is my third strike, and that's why it's a permanent ban.
Okay, that's what I was trying to understand, because I think it's basically we're trying to gain some insight into how their policies function. Not that it makes it any more fair that the fact that it was the third strike, therefore it warrants a ban. I don't think so. I think a lot of people would disagree that whatever you wrote warrants a ban. But yeah, just so we understand a bit better how it works, I wanted to ask you about George Galloway. So again, George Galloway, super famous British member of parliament, or I should say former MP. At the same time they banned you, they've also went ahead and slapped him with this Russia state-affiliated media label. And I'm assuming this is because of his television program that used to air. It doesn't air anymore. It was called the mother of all talk shows, Moats. That was picked up by Sputnik, I think. What do you make of this label?
Again, here's the problem. I mean, Galloway is, of course, a British subject, and he's protected by British law. But as an American, and Twitter, of course, is a U.S. owned company. When we speak of freedom of speech, understand that it doesn't apply to a private platform like Twitter. There is no constitutional First Amendment right of freedom of speech when you're dealing with Twitter or Facebook or anything else. The Constitution is very specific that it prohibits Congress from enacting legislation that would otherwise inhibit the free speech. Except, and here comes the important caveat, when Congress enacts legislation or carries out hearings that single out Russian state-sponsored media and labels it through this process of legislation as an existential threat to the national security of the United States, and then tells these CEOs of Twitter, Facebook, and everything when they're down before, what are you doing to shut this down? What are you doing to stop Russian disinformation from being disseminated on your platform? And then the Twitter people say, my God, if we don't act, Congress will enact legislation that impacts us. So we will proactively go out and seek to control or inhibit or otherwise limit the speech of anybody who can fall into the rubric or the label of Russian state sponsor. Now we have a problem.
They're pressuring
now
them.
We have Congress literally enacting legislation or threatening to enact legislation in a manner which compels the CEOs of Twitter and Facebook and everything to enact policies that do limit the freedom of speech. And it is a First Amendment violation. And I wish more constitutional lawyers out there would take this seriously. But they all, graduate from Harvard, and therefore they think they know best. Read the damn Constitution, read the laws, understand what we're dealing with here. This is a frontal assault on freedom of speech, and it has a chilling effect on everybody involved in the Twitter sphere or in Facebook, because there but for the grace of God go I. You could be somebody out there that disagrees with everything I say, I write, I think. You could hate me for whatever reason you want to hate me. But understand this, one day your opinions are going to be unpopular. And if you think it's okay for Twitter to shut me down, when the coin flips and they come after you, you'll regret not having stood up and fought for people like me, George Galloway, not because you agree with us, because you respect the right for people to speak freely about topics of importance.
Elon Musk just bought, I think, 9% of Twitter shares, so he has, I think, the largest ownership stake in the company. He's he's expressed dissatisfaction at Twitter's policies. He said he wants to make the platform more centered on free speech. What's your message to Elon Musk? Within the same week that he buys this all these shares, trying to make Twitter better at free speech, you're banned, and then George Galloway slapped with this, Russia state-affiliated media label.
Proof is in the pudding, pal. You can make all the claims you want, but until you enact policies that reflect the wonderful rhetoric you're putting out, I don't trust you. Let's see if he can do it. It would be one hell of a courageous thing, not because of me, but because of the statement it makes that Twitter is a platform that tolerates a legitimate, non-criminal, free speech. And I'll tell you what, if he could do that, as popular as Twitter, because Twitter right now there's a lot of people that are just not happy about this, and they're dropping out of it. It's not the wonderful experience that maybe it used to be. And it's not just the lack of an edit button. It's the fact that they inhibit free speech, that they have these ridiculous things. If Elon Musk can come in and actually change policy, Twitter policy, get rid of the thought police. I mean, that's just an absolute requirement. Get rid of the thought police or the thought algorithms or whatever the hell you got going on right now that singles out people for these bans on stupidity. Look, you know what a threat is. If I got on Twitter and said, Richard Medhurst, I'm going to hunt you down and kill you, that's a threat. That's a threat. But if I came on and I said, Richard, your show sucked the other night, and you should be ashamed of yourself because the things that you're promulgating only empower Israel to kill more Palestinians, and I'm ashamed of you. You can sit there and say, Ritter, you're so high, I don't care what you think, but I didn't threaten you. I simply expressed an emotional opinion based upon what you said. And I have every right to say that, as you have every right to either ignore me, block me, or respond to me. Now, if you write back and say, Ritter, you scum-sucking pig, how dare you say this about me? The next time I see you, I'm going to punch you in the face. You just threatened me. Yeah. And now Twitter has a right to come in and say, that's wrong. But if you came back and said, every time you write an op-ed, I'm going to write a letter to the editor and tell them why they were stupid to publish your op-ed, that's not really a threat. I mean, it sort of is, but it's not a physical threat. It's your legitimate right to express your opinion. People have to get thick skins, man. Social media is about taking the guardrails off. This isn't, polite conversation. It should be, but it isn't. It's unfiltered. It's raw. It's meant by the very nature, 288 characters. It's meant to be done by somebody who's typing on their phone while they're walking, chewing gum, and trying to eat a Subway sandwich at the same time. It's not meant to be PhD level, interaction. So treat it for what it is, and stop banning people for expressing unpopular positions. I mean, especially if you buy into the concept of free speech, because free speech means that everybody gets to say what they want to say, as long as they're not threatening people or bringing harm on people. But the free exchange of ideas is what makes democracy flourish.
Well, Scott, I mean, I get both of those kinds of tweets directed at me all the time, but I get what you're saying. Actually, on that note, I'm really interested to know your opinion about something, because in Germany and in Austria, following World War II, any sort of Nazi rhetoric is banned. Nazi music, Nazi posters, Nazi salutes, all of this is banned. And given the history that the Holocaust took place there, some people maybe in the US might say that's a violation of free speech, but given the culture in Germany and Austria, people there think it's correct to do that. What's your take on that?
I mean, first of all, I understand that's a real thing because I was getting, because I'm critical of the Ukrainian Nazi affiliation, I would get these warnings that under German law, I've violated X, Y, and Z, and my tweet has been reviewed, but found not to be in violation of Twitter policy, things of that nature.
Yeah.
Look, I understand. I mean, denazification is denazification. And that means that when you have a nation like Germany that had bought into the Nazi ideology, lock, stock, and barrel, massive rallies at Nuremberg, Sieg Heil, the whole thing. You can't just defeat them militarily and say it's over. You have to root it out. And you don't do that overnight. Mm-hmm. And so I have no problem with a nation passing laws that bans anything that could be construed as legitimizing, admiring, worshiping, embracing Nazi ideology. No problem with that. I do have a problem with people taking it to an extreme that you can't even study the history or study or discuss the events, because if you can't understand how you got to that point, you can't prevent it happening again.
Right.
And so, I think that when the targeted generation is no longer a factor, a meaningful factor, I don't mean they all have to die out. I mean that they've been supplanted by follow-on generations that haven't been directly infected by the ideology, that your society will only get stronger by allowing them to discuss these issues openly, freely, while still maintaining laws that prohibit the mainstreaming of this ideology, meaning there can be no Nazi political parties, there can be no, Nazi rallies, things of that nature, and no public display of symbols that are solely linked to, Nazi ideology. I have no problem with suppressing that, but to deny people the ability to discuss their own history is to deny the ability of the people to make your society stronger. Because in that vacuum of ignorance, people won't understand why it's a threat.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine if you're 4 generations in and you're being told this stuff is horrible, but you can't discuss it because you have laws that prohibit it. How do you know it's horrible? So you have to let people think it through. You have to let people talk. I think it's bad for Germany to have these and Austria to have these kind of laws in place today. I think that you could definitely create a system that still banned the practice of a politicization of Nazi ideology while permitting an open discussion about the history of it, the dangers of it, why it's bad, and how do we prevent it from happening today.
Yeah. I get what you're saying, and I think if we compare Germany and Austria, I think most people would say Germany did a better job of looking back at its own history critically and learning from it, because they're fully cognizant of the fact that this ideology was born there, this was fermented there. Meanwhile, the Austrians, although they wanted to be annexed and they took part in that, Hitler himself is Austrian. They tend to view themselves as sort of more victims than actual having partaken in it. And then you don't have that process where people look back at themselves and their history critically. But I totally get what you're saying, and given, speaking of Germany, this leads us to a very interesting question here, because the United States has always been one of the main proponents of disarming Germany, specifically after World War I, World War II, and now we are seeing the United States encouraging Germany to spend more on its military than Russia, right? So now the Germans have committed 100 billion euros to their military. They've raised their military expenditure from 1.5 to 2% of the GDP, which is what Trump was nagging them to do. He said they weren't paying their bills to NATO. So again, what's your opinion as an American, as a military man, as a connoisseur of history? Do you think this is a good idea to see Germany rearm like this?
History repeats itself. And if you militarize German society, history is going to repeat itself. I'm just stating a fact.
Yep.
And if this continues down this path, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 50 years, American troops are once again crossing the Atlantic to kill Germans. Because the last thing you need is to create the confluence between a powerful German economy with a growing nationalism in Germany. You see this, especially now that the European Union is fraying. We see right now within the European Union two primary centers of gravity, one in Paris, one in Berlin. The one in Paris is talking about, sort of a free economic approach. The one in Berlin is talking about more tightening of economic controls, traditional German frugality, et cetera. And now that we have this whole sanctions related economic crisis, we're going to see Germany further isolating itself from Europe. And the second that happens, and Germany starts to act as an individual nation as opposed to a member of a team, and then you link that with German militarization, the only bad things can happen. There was a meme. It was funny. But it basically was something along the lines of, "Let me get this right. You guys want me to rebuild my military and then march eastward through Poland to fight the Russians. So I just want to make sure that's what you want, because just in case questions are asked later." Meaning, so, tongue in cheek, but it's like, are you really even thinking about what you're asking the Germans to do? And I'll give you another thing here. Again, I can't predict history, but I know history. If we have a situation where Ukraine is dismembered, if the Russians begin a process of dismembering Ukraine, and we're seeing that, the Donbass is going to be expanded to include Mariupol. You're probably going to see a giant swath of southern Ukraine go over to either expand Crimea so that it has secure water. You create a land bridge, the potential to go all the way out to Odessa and physically bar Ukraine from the Black Sea. If that happens, there could very well be additional partitioning from a collapsed Ukrainian state that includes Hungary taking over the portions of Ukraine where you have a Hungarian-speaking majority, Romania moving into the Romanian areas, and Poland deciding that Western Ukraine, which used to be Polish, is now Polish again. And everybody say, well, that's cool. Why can't we do that? Well, the Germans worked very hard on Ostpolitik during the Cold War. And one of the key tenets of Ostpolitik was for Germany to say, we recognize the finality of the borders as they currently exist between Germany and Poland. That we recognize that we have permanently lost Silesia because of the war. But now if you start redrawing the map, I can guarantee you a dime to a dollar that Germany is going to start talking about the return of Silesia. And now we've just told them to build a $100 billion military. Literally, we're creating the conditions for a new German-Polish war. So no, I'm against this. Germany should not be allowed to rearm to this extent. Germany should be, all of Europe should really look at this is why the Russian argument about a new European security framework is so important, because there's no need for Europe to maintain large standing armies. Large standing armies only get Europe in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Europe needs the military force necessary to defend its own territory from non-European threats and to collectively respond to global situations as needed. Meaning that if you need to send a division into Africa, Europe comes together and they put together a combined division under unified command, and they go to Africa to do whatever they need, or they go wherever they need to go. But you don't need a large standing German army. This will only cause trouble for Europe. And I'm sorry, Germany, you don't get a break. you don't get a break. There's a reason why we dismembered you at the end of World War II, because you suck as a nation. You suck as a superpower. Maybe you think your people have been re-educated. They haven't. And if we remilitarize them, and if we allow the disintegration of European security to continue to, the unraveling because of the Ukrainian war, Germany's just going to become more isolationist, and that isolationism will feed nationalism, and that nationalism become militant nationalism, and now we've given them permission to build $100 billion army. No, wrong.
Do you think Germany should be in NATO in the first place? Do you think it should be neutral like Austria?
Yes, Germany should not be part of NATO. Germany should not be allowed to join collective security organizations. Germany should be demilitarized as much as possible. The last thing German people should be thinking about is tanks, artillery, and airplanes.
Scott, I wanted to ask you about the United Nations, because Russia tried convening an emergency session at the United Nations Security Council to discuss what happened at Bucha or Bucha. The United Kingdom, which holds the presidency of the Security Council this month, they said no. Why do you think they said no? And do you think that this harmed investigating the issue?
Well, we'll start with the second part. There's been no serious investigation of the issue. The bodies have been removed. To the best of my knowledge, they've been buried. I don't think that they've been subjected to forensic examination. I don't think they've been given the kind of autopsies required to determine time of death and cause of death. There's no serious investigation taking place. So let's just stop pretending that there's going to be a serious investigation. Whatever takes place is going to be a politicized kangaroo court, similar to what we see with American prosecutors. Any grand jury can indict a ham sandwich, is the old saying, and that's what's going to happen here.
Right.
Whatever slipshod legal court of jurisdiction that'll be cobbled together by the United States, Great Britain, and others is just going to be farce. The only possibility of a tribunal of legitimate jurisdiction to be created would be if Russia creates a military tribunal and prosecutes all the Ukrainian war criminals, using this tribunal. That's the only way anything resembling justice is going to occur here. It's not going to come from the United Nations, and we see this. The reason why Britain did what they did is, Russia was, politically in a politically savvy move, was seeking to isolate the Bucha incident and have a dedicated emergency meeting about it. But that meeting would have produced a fact set that was inconvenient to the British, the Americans, the Ukrainians. A meeting had already been scheduled for the issue of Ukraine the day after the Russians requested, and the British were in control of that agenda as the president of the Security Council. So the British wanted to ensure that whatever actions the Russians took would be diluted because it would be a subset of an agenda already decided by the British, and it would deny the Russians the ability to seize the initiative in terms of the information warfare aspect of this crisis.
And you mentioned that any investigation that takes place, is perhaps not going to lead to much. My question was, to you is, what would a proper investigation look like? What body, if there is one, do you think should be leading this? Do you think it should, be strictly scientists who are doing the work? I mean, that goes without saying, given there's a lot of forensic stuff to do. But how do you avoid this investigation being politicized? Can we even do that?
Well, the only way to avoid it being politicized is to the victor goes the spoils. The International Criminal Court has it has limited jurisdiction. B, it has no credibility. And C, it's impossible for it to act against a major European power or major world power. The concept of the ICC bringing any Russian to justice is just an absurdity. It's not going to happen. Just like they're never going to bring an American to justice. America at least was honest enough to say, if you try, we passed a law that says Delta Force comes in, kicks down the door, and kills everybody. Because it just isn't going to happen. Nor should it. You know, here's
why do you think so?
The ICC. Well, the ICC was created not to bring Europeans or Americans to justice. It was to bring the third world to European justice. Its primary function was to prosecute, genocide in Africa, and it should never been allowed to do that. Never been allowed to do that. Africa needs to police itself. If there's genocide taking place in Africa, it's incumbent upon the Africans to create a court of jurisdiction that Africans agree to, and for the judges to be African judges sitting in judgment of Africans who committed crimes against Africans. That's the way it has to work, because otherwise it's just quasi-colonialism. Literally, it's sickening what happened there. People say the ICC did some good. Not really, because you disenfranchised Africa. You eliminated Africa's ability to establish its own judicial sovereignty over issues of singular impact on Africa. Now, there was some limited success with Serbia, except that whole process was contaminated by the illegality of the NATO conflict against Serbia. In Yugoslavia was just so full of contradictions. Of these prosecutions was politicized in nature. That doesn't mean that crimes weren't committed. That doesn't mean that guilty people weren't brought to justice. But it does mean that the goal of the court, you don't prosecute people just to prove that you can put somebody in jail. You prosecute people to create a deterrence. The whole idea of justice of this nature is if people carry out an action that society as a whole deems to be, inappropriate or not conducive to sound social progression, you have to cease that action, and then the best way to prevent it from happening again is not only to punish the perpetrator, but to punish the perpetrator in a manner that deters other people from carrying out similar actions in the future. So did the prosecution of war criminals in Yugoslavia succeed in bringing justice to certain perpetrators? Yes. But did it succeed in the concept of deterrence? All we have to do is look at Yugoslavia, and we understand that the answer is not just no, but hell no. The ICC is this court that needs to be shut down immediately. The fact of the matter is, there's really only two courts that can sit in judgment of what's going on inside Ukraine today, and that is either a Ukrainian court or a Russian court. And it's incumbent, and what's going to happen is the court that's going to have jurisdiction is going to be the side that wins the war. End of story. Which means Russia is going to have jurisdiction, and Russia is going to seek justice. This is what happened at the end of the Second World War. The victors were able to bring together the tribunal. It wasn't a global tribunal. It was a tribunal of the five powers that won the war against Germany. The same thing happened to the Japanese. They were tried by tribunals brought together by the victors. It was the victors' law that was being put forward. Russia has made a case for denazification that the rest of the world isn't embracing. So is it justice, therefore, if the ICC refuses to prosecute, denazification-related cases? Yeah, because Russia needs justice. Russia wants justice as a nation. So in order to get Russian justice, Russia will have to deliver the justice. And they will do that by winning the war and then imposing their system of justice, because to turn this over to the ICC will politicize it. Will mean that it'll be diluted. You're not going to achieve anything. I can guarantee you this. If Russia runs a tribunal bringing the Ukrainians to justice, not only will the perpetrators be punished, but the level of deterrence that will be established by the Russian prosecutions and the convictions that will ensue will be real. So the next time Russia points an accusatory finger at a nation that's violating what Russia says is its existential national security interest, people will not only think about the military aspect of the Russian threat, but the judicial aspect of it, meaning that if Russia says you are committing crimes, Russia is serious about it and they will hold you to account. And I believe the United States should do the same thing. Opening up Guantanamo Bay didn't deter anybody from anything. What Guantanamo Bay proved is that America was afraid of its justice system. America was afraid to hold these terrorists to account. America was afraid to bring them to a trial before the American people. If you want to deter terrorism, you take an Osama bin Laden and you put him on the docket in New York City, and you hold a trial where the totality of his crimes are exposed for the entire world to see. And then you bring him to justice in a manner that tells everybody else out there, you will never get away with this. If you commit this crime, we will hold you to account. What have we done instead? We've created this embarrassment in Guantanamo Bay. And has it deterred anybody? No. Terrorism is alive and well and living around the world. Nobody's afraid of Guantanamo Bay. Nobody's afraid of American justice because the American people themselves are afraid of American justice. So again, the only way justice is going to come from this war is at the hands of the victor. And that means it's going to be Russian justice. Well, and the Russians don't care. The Russians don't care if the French are unhappy with that. They don't.
Well, the only people that do end up in the docket are, journalists. That's who we put on trial, not actual terrorists.
Julian Assange. Yeah, I mean, we're really good.
The point you made about the ICC being a colonial body. I've heard many people make this point that basically most of the prosecutions and successful ones are basically just of African leaders. So the fact that Russia is not a party to it, the United States is not a party to it, the UK refuses to ratify the crime of aggression, makes it sort of useless in terms of holding the great powers to account. Do you think Zelensky, because I think you tweeted, speaking of your Twitter, you posted on Twitter a few days ago that Zelensky is going to be caught and he's going to be tried for war crimes by the Russians. Do you think that that's a possibility? Do you think that they actually want to do that? Because a lot of people have said that if they actually wanted to get rid of Zelensky, they would have already done that. They need him alive because he's a useful political tool for the narrative. What would you make?
Well, the two aren't contradictory. You need him alive because he has been empowered by the West with a level of credibility that, any surrender document that he agrees to will be treated as legitimate. Mm-hmm. And already the West is saying, look, whatever you agree to, we'll support. We'd prefer you don't give away the farm, but whatever you agree to, we'll support. And that's why the Russians keep him around, because they need a surrender agreement that is embraced by the rest of the world, especially if Crimea, for instance, is going to be transferred from Ukraine to Russia by the Ukrainians agreeing to this. The world can't sit there and say, well, we disagree with what Ukraine has done. We won't recognize it. I mean, if Ukraine recognizes it, the world's going to have to, especially if Zelensky is the guy who signs that document. But when that's all said and done, again, to give you an example, Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy, but and there were other members of the Confederacy that had to be dealt with when talking about the surrender of the Confederacy. But but once the Confederacy surrendered, we arrested them and tried them and put them in jail for crimes. And Zelensky isn't going to be absolved of his criminal behavior, especially the more he behaves the way he is right now. He is literally empowering the neo-Nazi police and military formations to perpetrate crimes against humanity against his own citizens. And
do you think he's in control?
Pardon?
Do you think he's actually in control? Because it would seem that he doesn't really have a say in many things.
Oh, the funny thing is, when you go before a court of law, you don't get to, if constitutionally you have the power,
right?
And then you opt not to exercise the power, or you exercise the power in a manner which is deemed criminal. You don't get to go before the judge and say, "Well, I know the Constitution said that, but really I didn't have the power." No, I'm sorry, dude. We're going by the law. These are the powers that are enumerated to you, and you have opted either to abuse these powers or fail to exercise these powers to prevent these crimes from happening. So Zelensky is a war criminal. And if the Russians arrest him and prosecute him, he will be treated as such. And I don't believe that you can have closure by letting Zelensky and his government walk free. Now, I'm not a Russian. It's not my reputation. It's not my policy. I'm just saying, from a conceptual standpoint, if Zelensky walks free and ends up living in his multi-million-dollar mansion in Miami, then justice has not been served.
Scott, I wanted to ask you about some of the more recent claims the U.S. has, started making against Russia. So this is, again, in addition to the massacre, they're also saying now that Russia has mobile crematoriums. So let me show you this headline from the Telegraph. They're saying that Russians burning bodies in mobile crematoriums to cover up their crimes in Mariupol. Do you believe that? And what about the claim that they have chemical weapons? And they were saying on NBC, I'll play the clip, just a few seconds. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. But the gist of it is that it doesn't matter if the intelligence is real. It's about countering the Russians in advance. I'll play it. Let's see if you can hear it as well with the viewers.
When they announced that Russia had gone to China to ask for help with getting some weapons. That hasn't come to pass yet, and it was almost a way of putting China on notice. Hey, we know what's going on here. Don't let this happen. So really interesting and unprecedented use of intelligence here, Allison.
Yeah, Ken, as you just said, not just intelligence here, unprecedented use. One U.S. official telling you it doesn't even have to be solid intelligence when we talk about it. It's more important to get out ahead of them. Putin specifically, before they do something, it's preventative.
Right. So, again, what do you make of that, Scott? It's about being preventative.
Well, that's literally that's what information operations is. That's what information warfare is. It's not about truth. It's about perception. It's about shaping perception to your advantage. This is a practice as old as as intelligence itself. And when you think of, there's a concept known as the OODA loop. I don't know if you've ever heard that before. John Boyd is a former fighter pilot, and he came up with the OODA loop. It's a observe, orient, decide, act. And basically it's the decision-making cycle. And the notion in dogfighting is that if you're the one who's acting, forcing a reaction, you're in control of the dogfight, and you could basically maneuver and shoot down anybody as long as you maintain that control. You're inside their decision-making cycle. So by exploiting what they call intelligence, it's not intelligence. Look, intelligence is processed data that's processed in a manner to get the most accurate assessment possible. That's intelligence. It's pursuit of the fact-based truth. What they're talking about there is anti-intelligence. It's basically information warfare. It's using data not to pursue the truth, but to shape an outcome through perception manipulation. And one reason why you would do that is in the information warfare spectrum, it's just like a dogfight. I start off by putting something out there. I compel you to react to that. Now you're chasing a ghost, and you're down here chasing this thing down the rabbit hole. And meanwhile, reality is going in this direction. And now you're not positioned to deal with reality. I have dominated the information warfare battle space. So that's what the US is talking about here. It's a very dangerous thing, especially if you're a democracy, because once you go down this path and you start to abuse intelligence in this fashion, who's ever going to trust you again? The next time the future Colin Powell is before the Security Council, and now he's picking up the vial of white powder, but this time it's real. It really is white powder. And he's trying to convince you it's real. No one's going to believe you anymore because you can't be trusted. So this is the kind of stuff that normally you don't want to engage in as an intelligence professional. You know, if I, you know, I actually, you know, got involved in, you know, helping the British out, Operation Mass Appeal back in 1997, 1998. We had received a lot of intelligence from sources that were less than trustworthy, mainly Ahmed Chalabi's people and Kurdish intelligence sources. And it wasn't actionable. In order for me to use it as an inspector, the intelligence had to have specifics that could be acted on. We had to deem it to be accurate. We had to corroborate it. There had to be a physical location, the thing that we were looking for, and it had to be within a time frame that made it reasonably viable. We had a lot of information that didn't fit that, but it was fun to read. I mean, it was like reading a novel because most of it was fiction. But we kept it in the files anyways, just in case we got another piece of information that turned out to be accurate, and then we could cross-reference it and build it up. But we were sitting on this, and the British said, hey, you're sitting on a lot of stuff. Why don't you give it to us? And then we'll massage it, and then we're going to turn it over to the press around the world to create the impression that Iraq is non-compliant, that Iraq is pursuing weapons programs. And the reason why we wanted to do that is we were getting our butts kicked by the Iraqis, the French, and the Russians in the Security Council. The Iraqis were accusing people like me and others of deliberately creating confrontations for the purpose not of disarming Iraq, but seeking to get sanctions extended, to collect intelligence on Saddam, etc. And they had a point to an extent. I mean, I wasn't, but I understand where they were coming from because some people were doing that. But the French and the Russians were starting to say maybe the inspections have run their course. And when you have 2 of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, and the Chinese as well. So now we have 3 of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council starting to express skepticism. We felt we needed to counter the Iraqi propaganda because the Iraqis are putting a lot of garbage out there. I mean, like for me, when I would travel to Iraq, I mean, literally the day I arrived, I would be the only story on Iraqi TV. And they'd run these really slick, polished things showing me to be, you know, a hungry wolf eating Iraqi children, that all I wanted to do was starve the Iraqis. I was there to cause trouble. I was a CIA colonel. I was the personification of evil. They gave me a nickname, Abu Azamat. I was the father of all crises. And, you know, and sometimes, you know, look, if I went out to an Iraqi restaurant, and we did, I mean, Iraq was a thriving country. We didn't always eat MREs. If we had a night off, we'd go to an Iraqi restaurant. And I don't know how many times, I mean, I couldn't walk in an Iraqi restaurant without the entire restaurant coming to a complete standstill. And every Iraqi just staring at me. And, but the Iraqis are Arabs. They're polite. They're the guest. They'd sit you down. But I oftentimes had people come up to me and ask me where my soul was, where my heart was. You know, I had women crying about, you know, what I was doing to their children. We came in once and we were stopped at a traffic light coming in from Habbaniyah Airport, going to the headquarters, and a school bus pulls up next to us. And in there are just a whole bunch of Iraqi school children, mainly girls dressed in their little dresses. And then a teacher looked out and saw me. it's Abu Azamat, and next thing you know, they're leading the chant, and you got everybody in the bus, Saddam Hussein, chanting. And then I just look up at them, I smile and I wave. They stop chanting immediately. They all wave back, even the teachers. I mean, so you took it. But the point is, we were engaged in a propaganda war, and so we did information operations. In retrospect, I regret doing it because the credibility of the special commission comes not from manipulating perception, but adhering solely to fact.
Right.
So that when fortunately, the whole world didn't know that I did this. But had the world known that I did that, and I come out and I start saying, this is the reality of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. This is my experience. You need to believe me because of this. People would say, yeah, but weren't you the dude that did Operation Mass Appeal? Weren't you the guy that was selling fiction to the Times of India to manipulate India public opinion against the Iraqis? If you were willing to promulgate something that was less than 100% accurate then, how can I trust you now? And as an intelligence officer, you can't go down that route. You have to be able to stand before people and say that this is my best assessment, my professional judgment based upon the assiduous study of available fact sets where we have weeded out insufficient data. We've removed contradictory data, and this is the decision, the point I'm making. The United States government, in engaging in this information operation against Russia, is discrediting itself, absolutely discrediting itself. You can never again trust an American intelligence official because they've publicly said that it's okay not to be 100% accurate. It's okay not to be true because it's not the pursuit of truth we want. It is about manipulating perception.
Yeah, it's an astonishing thing to say, honestly. I mean, we know it's done. Every country engages in it, but to say it like that, it's quite damning. And again, Scott, if I know it's there's a war on, and as we're just saying, there's a lot of propaganda on both sides. But if I could just get your thoughts, I mean, what do you make of these allegations that they're going to use chemical weapons? The Russians, right? They're being accused of that, and these mobile crematoriums. Because on the one hand, they're saying the Russians are so evil, they just shoot people dead in the street and leave the bodies there. And then at the same time, they're saying they're so sophisticated, they have mobile crematoriums to cover it up. I mean, yeah, hypothetically, both of those things could be true. It's just within 2 days of each other. I'm struggling to understand what's going on here. What can we believe and what can't we believe?
Well, Russia is a nation that is a signatory to the Geneva Conventions and has certain duties and responsibilities and obligations, that are created by international humanitarian law. And it's incumbent upon Russia, just like it is incumbent upon any warring party, to fully investigate any potential allegation of war crime. Mm-hmm. And one of the key aspects of an investigation is preservation of evidence, and the body is perhaps the best evidence of a war crime. The body contains inherently the evidence of time of death, nature of death, things of that nature. So if you're going around cleaning up the battlefield of civilian bodies and you're burning them without adequately recording every aspect of a potential crime, then one could say that you are you're cleaning up, you're cleaning up the crime scene. Mm-hmm. And so, if these mobile crematoriums are true, Russia has something to answer for. Why do you have them? What do you use them for? How do you document the bodies that are being burned? I mean, right. Why are you burning the bodies? Why can't you put them in mass interment, which is common practice, and then later on, after the war is done, you can disinter them and then seek identification of the bodies and return the remains to the families, something of that nature. But to burn them implies that you're afraid of something. Are you afraid of admitting to your own population the extent of the losses you've suffered on the battlefield? That's why you're burning the bodies of your own soldiers without returning them home. I just can't imagine. This is why I just don't think it's true. I mean, common sense and logic has to come into place. Russia is not this is not Boris and Natasha. This is Russia. This is Mother Russia. And what I mean by Mother Russia, this is a nation that has an Orthodox church, deeply religious people.
Right.
And these are Christian people who don't believe in cremating bodies. They believe in the bodies being buried, and there's a ceremony for returning the body to the earth. And there's a belief that the soul is connected to the body, and if the body is burned in a crematorium, the soul does not go to heaven. So you're asking me to buy into the notion that the Russian government is doing something where they gain no advantage, but they're undermining some very basic fundamentals of their society. So I just think it's an absurdity. And unless somebody has an actual photograph of one of these mobile crematoriums and showing them in operation and providing documentation of why the Russians are doing this, I just have to call it out as BS. Because what they're doing with this story is you're getting a Russian mother now to start to make phone calls. Hey, are you burning my son's body? Is my son's body going to come home? What's going on? And you're creating the potential for, internal dissent. So I think the story is just is total garbage. I don't trust it at face value because it doesn't pass the smell test. It just stinks. The same thing with the chemical weapons. I mean, first of all, what is the origin of this story? Is it that? But I mean, the timing of it. Nobody was talking about the use of chemical weapons when this war first started.
Mm-hmm.
The only time people started talking about the use of chemical weapons is after Russia took control of biological research facilities and started accusing the United States of the potential of having an offensive biological program. The reaction of the United States at that point was to say, oh no. The Russians are saying this because they're planning.
So it's deflection.
A biological attack. So we flipped the script and we projected this onto the Russians. And then we expanded that to bring in the Skripals from England and Navalny from Russia and the allegations of the use of the world's most deadly toxic chemical agent that didn't kill any of them. And now we're saying, and they could, we know they've used chemical weapons in the past. So now they're going to use chemical weapons to make up for their failure on the battlefield. And by doing this now, they've done something very dangerous because now the Nazis, I don't believe the Nazis in Germany or in Ukraine have the ability to carry out a Novichok-based chemical false flag. I don't think they have possession of that agent. But we now see, for instance, a nitric acid plant being blown up and in a cloud of nitric acid being released that could have harmed people. Of course, the first thing out of the Ukrainians' mouth was the Russians did this, but the Russians said, no, the Ukrainians did this. The Azov people wired it up and blew it. Now the Russians are saying the Azov people are wiring up a chlorine plant and are going to blow that and create a toxic cloud. And so the danger in the United States and NATO going down this disinformation, propaganda about chemical and biological weapons use is that you now have the Azov battalion and the Nazis believing that they can carry out a false flag event using a lesser toxic substance and create the potential for the United States now to intervene because Joe Biden has said the use of chemical or biological weapons is a red line and there will be a significant reaction. And we've seen that the United States is incapable of telling the truth. We know that the intelligence services say, we're going to say whatever the heck we want as long as we get the outcome that we want. It doesn't matter if it's true, we're just going to say it. So now, and we've seen their past practice in Syria where they have allowed Syrian rebels to create a narrative of chemical weapons used by the Syrian government to create the conditions for military intervention by the United States, Great Britain, and France. So there's a track record of very bad things coming from the United States failing to be assiduous in its dissemination of intelligence-based information. When it should be that when the United States says something, the world should say, yep, believe them 100% because they've been right every time before. The United States always tells the truth. Right now, the United States opens its mouth. If I were a bet man, I would bet that they're lying. You know what? If Vegas took that bet, I'd be a rich man because all the United States knows how to do is lie. We don't know how to tell the truth anymore because it's all a game of public perception, shaping perception. We're afraid of reality. Sometimes reality is complex. Sometimes reality is nuanced. Reality isn't black and white. It's gray. That's okay. Just tell the truth. People are smart enough once they receive the information to understand what the right thing to do is. You really don't have to explain it. You just have to be honest with people, trust them, empower them with the information, and they will, by and large, tend to make the right decision. But we don't trust anybody. We want to manipulate everything.
Do you think that's why they banned you from Twitter? Why they're banning others? Because you tell the truth and they're afraid of people finding out?
Well, I have to be careful by saying I tell the truth. I want to tell the truth, but this isn't a situation like Iraqi WMD where I was literally empowered with a near totality of the information, so that when I said something, you could take it to the bank. On the issue of Ukraine, I try to research it. I try to think it through. I try to put it through various tests. I want it to be the truth. I'm truthful in the way that I present it. But the last thing I want to leave with people is that when I say something about Ukraine, that it carries the same weight as a claim I would make, for instance, about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. With WMD, if I said it, you could bank it. It was right. With Ukraine, it's an opinion. It's an assessment. I could be right. I think I'm right. I want to be right, but I could be wrong. So I don't think that they fear the absolute correctness of my analysis because I'm not in a position to be absolutely correct. What they fear is the consequences of allowing me to present my data and my thinking, and the consequences of allowing you to do what you do, and the consequences of allowing George Galloway to do what he does, and Chris Hedges to do what they do. Because it's not that all of us have we don't have absolute say over what truth is. I don't think that you're arrogant enough to say that everything that comes out of your mouth is 100% accurate and truth. You want to be accurate, you want to be truthful, but you do the best you can, and I think people respect that. And if you stumble, people say, okay, stumble, but you didn't do it with ill intent. You did it because you were trying to pursue the truth. But it's that's the problem, is that you're trying to pursue the truth. You're trying to do the right thing. You're trying to inject integrity. You're trying to inject, honesty into a process which we know they don't want that. We know, based upon the quote you put up there and the statement made, they don't want the truth. They're trying to shape perception. They're trying to manipulate information to create a perception that is being manipulated to achieve a policy objective. So the truth or the search for truth becomes the enemy, and therefore it must be shut down. They're not shutting me down because I have a corner on the market for absolute 100% accuracy. No, they're shutting me down because I dare challenge what they're putting out there, and they fear me because my process is actually one that has far more integrity when it comes to the pursuit of truth than their process. Their process isn't the pursuit of truth, it's the pursuit of an outcome based upon the manipulation of data. And frankly speaking, it's the easiest thing to pick apart. I mean, proving American lies is very easy if you're assiduous with the pursuit of fact-based evidence. They fear this. And that's why they shut down my Twitter account. That's why they'll go after that's why they shut down RT. I mean, frankly speaking, RT, isn't perfect. Come on, we know nothing's perfect. We know what RT is. We know it's a state-sponsored media outlet. We know this. No one's pretending otherwise. Is it 100% controlled? No, it's not 100% controlled by the state. The state funds part of it, and then other people part, but it's also, it is responsive to state pressure. Of course it is. More than the New York Times is, even though the New York Times kowtows to American policy, but not because they're told to, it's because that's a business decision. But I will tell you this about RT. Never once has RT come down and said, well, two things. They've never said, you have to write this. That's not how this relationship works, man. If they came to me and said, you have to write this, I'd say sayonara. I don't have to do jack.
Yep.
I'm an American, man. No, it doesn't work that way. But they respect that. They've never tried that. I don't think, and they wouldn't have a good reputation if they did try to do that. The other thing they've never done is say, you have to say this. This is normally the relationship I have with RT, and it's the same relationship I have with any of the outlets. I wake up in the morning and I go through my morning routine, and suddenly, bang, in my head comes a brilliant idea. It's so brilliant that I sit down and I write an email or a text to the editor of choice. And I say, hey, this is happening. This is this. Would you like me to do a deeper dig into this? And that's the term I always use, a deeper dig. Boom, send it out there. They come back, what do you have in mind? And I say, this is what I have in mind. And then they'll say, yeah, or usually they'll say, great, go for it. Or they'll say, yeah, but wait a minute, there was this story out there, and are you sure you're not stretching it here? How do you account for this story? And then I either knew that, and I could come back instantly. I go, oh damn, I didn't know. Oh darn, I didn't know that. And I do the research, and then I answer. And once they're comfortable that I'm not making stuff up, I'm not trying to write something that's going to put them in a difficult position in terms of the fact of the story, not the angle, not anything, the facts. As long as I got my facts right, then they say, run with it. And RT has been the least intrusive editorial process out there. Now, I know why. I'm not stupid. It's because RT understands that in this current information warfare climate, the truth is their best weapon. The truth is their best weapon, especially when you have the United States saying right up front that we don't want to tell the truth. We want to manipulate data to achieve an objective based upon perception, not reality. So for RT, the truth is the weapon. They're going to let you pursue fact-based reporting because that's what the United States fears the most. The closer I get to home with the editorial process, the more restrictive it becomes, the more interfering the editors become, the more dictatorial they become in terms of the narrative and outcome and all this. RT has just been liberating, absolutely liberating. Consortium News, likewise, liberating, totally liberating. But everybody else, no, they seek to control the narrative. Not totally, but far more than RT does. And so that's why RT has been singled out. That's why they're shutting down RT, because they fear the truth.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I corroborate everything you're saying. I'm not the only one. There's no big brother type, standing behind your shoulder telling you what to write, what to do. It's the complete opposite. It's liberating. It's exactly what you said.
It's exactly.
I think this doesn't bode well, because you have in society this Russophobia, this Red Scare 2.0, 3.0, I should say. And on top of it, now it's being implemented. It's being put into action by big tech companies, like we saw with RT, like we saw with you, with George Galloway. Yeah, this doesn't bode well. I don't know how our countries, the US, the UK, can turn around and say they're democracies when they do this. I really don't.
One of the things that that's probably going to happen from this current war in Ukraine is we're going to see, in addition to, I believe, the empowerment of Russia, we're going to see the empowerment of China. We're going to see the empowerment of India. and we're going to see the empowerment of all of them together as part of a trans-Eurasian conglomerate, not just economic, but geopolitical in nature. That's going to radically change the way the Earth sources its gravitational pull. Right now, everything revolves around Washington, D.C. Everything is gravitated towards Washington. Washington, D.C. is the center of the universe. That's about to change. And when that changes, the arrogance of the United States, the hubris attached to American policies will have to alter, because right now America is used to dictating outcomes. But when the world transforms into a multipolarity reality, America can't dictate outcomes. America has to negotiate outcomes. And the process of negotiation brings with it an inherent requirement of integrity, because you can't negotiate with people that don't trust you. There's a difference between being the ultimate power and you can lie and people can't hold you to account. That's the way it exists today. That changes when your lies have consequences, and those consequences hit you in terms of economic impact or geopolitical posturing. I think the United States and the West are going to have to learn to be a little bit more honest, a little bit more humble. And with humility comes integrity. And most people of integrity have humility. The most corrupt people are the people that are imbued with hubris and arrogance. Right now, the United States is 100% imbued with hubris and arrogance. So we're corrupt. I think if we're compelled to become part of the world, equal part of the world, we're going to have to treat the world with respect, and the world's going to, and that respect implies we're going to have to start telling the truth. And therefore, I think that'll be more liberating for the American media, the American press, and it might actually breathe relevance and life back into this moribund amendment we call the First Amendment and freedom of speech. Because right now it's just dead in the water. It doesn't exist.
Well, Scott, you bring up a very important point, which is the shift to a multipolar world. And I wanted to ask you, just a few days ago, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he was in China, then he went to India. We had the ambassadors of the BRICS meeting with him, also in Moscow. So that's Brazil, India, China, South Africa. And when Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, he went to India, the Indian Prime Minister Modi, he only met with him, right? He's the only foreign dignitary that he personally met with in the last weeks. And when Lavrov was on this trip, he effectively announced that there is, there's the emergence of a new, just, democratic, multipolar world. What do you make of that? Do you think we are, this whole war in Ukraine is the catalyst? It's speeding that whole process up?
Well, there's no doubt about that. I mean, the war in Ukraine is it's a cleansing moment, and I don't mean that in a good way. It's like let's say you have a forest that's full of trees that are infected with with fungus and insects and all that, and then you have a forest fire come through and burn it all down. That's not necessarily a good thing, except that what emerges in the aftermath of that fire is a viable forest with healthy trees that'll grow better and produce have a better impact on the environment. What existed prior was just a festering cesspool of infection. The world today is a festering cesspool of infection because of the United States, because of our efforts to impose unilateral hegemony over the world. Ukraine, you can't make the transition from that to what Russia and China are seeking to do without a forest fire. And Ukraine is that forest fire. And it's sad for the Ukrainian people. It's sad for the world. But I think that, for instance, Russia's economic addiction to the West is being broken because of this. The impetus necessary to get Russia to make the strategic pivot away from the West to China and Eurasia is only happening because of this. The liberation of the Russian government from the economic infection of Western influence and the role played by the oligarchs. I mean, a lot of people don't understand what's happening here. The oligarchs are being disenfranchised.
Right.
And Putin, everybody's like, oh, well, these are Putin's best friends. No, Putin doesn't like the oligarchs.
They did him a favor.
They did him the biggest favor possible because, and notice what Putin did. As soon as this happened, he gave a speech where he told the oligarchs, get the hell out of my country. Leave. Go live in your mansions. Go live with your wealth. But don't come back here. You're not welcome anymore. And he could only do that because they no longer have the money they thought they had. The West took it all. So, this is a cleansing moment. There's going to be a radical realignment of centers of gravity in the world. The singular polarity that exists is being broken apart, and it's going to be spread out. And BRICS is probably the initial model of where these centers of gravity are going to, the new centers of gravity are going to emerge.
The Russians have demanded that unfriendly countries pay for gas in rubles, right? So 40% of Europe's gas comes from Russia. All the gas that's flowing right now, beginning of April, from Russia to Europe, these bills have to be settled mid-April and end of April. Hungary, they've just announced that they are willing to pay for Russian gas in rubles, so they've broken ranks with the EU. That doesn't really bode well for the EU because the whole point is that they're supposed to have at least a consolidated political front. Do you think that that there's going to be a domino effect? Other countries are going to follow suit?
Yeah, absolutely. They have no choice. Austria.
Right.
How does Austria think it's going to get its gas?
80% of its gas comes from Russia.
Austria is going to be paying in rubles. The Vatican is going to be paying in rubles. Slovakia is going to be paying in rubles. And Germany is going to be paying in rubles. They claim they're not going to be, but when the economic reality of what's about to happen to Germany hits home, and I would be willing to put money on the fact that Scholz won't survive the year.
Can I just say the supermarket chain Aldi? So in Germany, they have it divided by Aldi Süd, Aldi Nord. Aldi Nord have said they're raising the food prices on a lot of products, some by 20 to 50%. This includes products like meat, butter, sausages, essentials, right? Basic necessities. I don't know how bad it's going to be in the U.S. because Biden was coming out and saying, yes, there are going to be food shortages. How long do you think people in the West, how long do you think Europeans and Americans are going to accept these kinds of conditions, higher gas prices, higher food prices, just for the sake of what's being sold in the media, as well as we're protecting European values by arming neo-Nazis? How long do you think it's going to go on for? Do you think there's going to be a breaking point, or do you think that the media is so good at propagandizing people that they're just going to, they'll tolerate it?
Well, the media works when people come home and they have heat, they have food, and they have comfort.
Right.
The media doesn't work when you come home and you're cold and you're hungry and you're uncomfortable. There's no amount of propaganda that can change those realities.
Good point.
And how long is this going to last until the next election? It's over. There's not a single democracy that will have its current government survive the next election if this policy stays in place and the economies of that country tank. No government will survive a tanking economy. None. Now, in the United States, we don't have a parliamentarian system. So it's pretty much accepted right now that the Congress, that we have a midterm election coming up in November, and that the Republicans are going to gain control of Congress because the Democrats can't spin this. No matter how much Americans claim they support the Ukrainians, at the end of the day, high gas prices, high food prices are going to basically dictate that the government in power has failed. And that's it. So Biden And then 2024 comes up, and unless he can turn it around, then the Republicans will gain the White House as well. In a parliamentary system, you can get a vote of no confidence. And that can happen very quickly, especially if things are getting out of control. Political parties that are aligned with the power structure of the B are going to start, people are going to start jumping ship because that's their life. There's going to be a vote of no confidence. There'll be a new election, and it's a virtual guarantee that the party responsible for the economic collapse will be voted out of office. And then the new people will come in understanding exactly what needs to be done, which is to change the policies that created the economic difficulties. Now, normally politicians are pretty astute, and they don't like to commit political suicide, which is why I believe as this situation starts to unravel, you might see people jumping ship. And I would not be surprised to see Germany jump ship soon, because Scholz knows. Look, he knows he's done, finished. He won't last the year if this happens. I mean, there was talk about BASF, a big German company, laying off 40,000 people, and those jobs will never come back, ever.
Yeah.
And we can just go down, and that'll just create a cascading effect. And the German economists have said this will be a permanent damage. This will be damage that hasn't been seen since the end of the Second World War. So, what politician can survive that? None. None. Macron might not even survive.
Right.
There's a chance that Le Pen is going to beat Macron.
Oh my goodness.
And this is also the danger. If you remember what we talked about earlier about Germany, liberal democracies flourish in times of economic well-being. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party did not come into power because the Weimar Republic was an economic powerhouse.
Right.
They came into power because the Weimar Republic was a banana case. Just a useless, economy. And Europe's about to become a useless economy. And look at the governments that have survived recent elections.
Hungary.
It wasn't a wonderful liberal democracy that came out of that thing. It was a very conservative, nationalistic government that is towing a different policy line. Serbia had an election, same thing. And I think Europe is going to be going in that direction. I think ultimately the suicidal economic policies carried out by the so-called liberal elite are going to result in a conservative nationalistic backlash.
I think one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons you had liberals upset at the fourth consecutive re-election of the Hungarian government is that they basically one of their pledges was that they're going to guarantee energy for Hungarians. That means Russian gas, right? So they're the first to come out and say that they have no problem paying for it. And obviously, that upsets the West because they want people who fall in line just do what they're told. Do you think sanctions?
Perception of unity. The perception of unity. It's not the reality of unity. There's nothing unified about Europe right now. Nothing. But the perception of unity, shaped by Biden, the known prevaricator of truth.
For those of you who don't know, we have very old footage of Scott challenging Joe Biden himself in congressional hearings. It's quite amusing to watch. I just want to ask you something, Scott. Do you think sanctions on Russia are backfiring? Because, as we said, food prices are rising in Germany. Biden is saying there's going to be a scarcity of food in the U.S. I want to show you a tweet from former Labour MP Chris Williamson. He said that...
I better not look at it. They might close them down.
He said after the latest sanctions on Russia, its currency and stock market strengthened. Meanwhile, the cost of living crisis in the UK is turning into a catastrophe for people on low incomes, thanks to our idiotic political class who want to prolong war in Ukraine rather than press for peace. We've seen that. In addition to the blowback at home, We've seen that Russia's currency, the ruble, has regained much of its value. It's quite close to the pre-war value it had against the dollar. I know some people say that, well, yeah, that's because Russia's playing games. They forced everybody to who's making money in dollars to sell 80% of their income for rubles. They've forced these gas payments in rubles now, and that basically Russia's artificially shoring up its currency or appreciating the ruble, and it's just temporary. Do you think that it's just temporary, or the Russians have perhaps found a way around it?
Well, let me preface it by saying that whatever Russia's doing is not a knee-jerk reaction. The United States has been projecting the threat of sanctions against Russia for some time now. Joe Biden met with Vladimir Putin in Geneva in June 2021, and he famously claims to have stared Putin in the eyes and told him about the massive sanctions that will cause unprecedented harm to the Russians, and all that. There's no doubt that he did that, and there's also no doubt that Putin went back to Moscow, convened his national security team, and said, "Okay, how do we deal with this? What's our strategy? Because this is going to happen. If we make the move, we now know what they're going to do. We have to assume the very worst, and we have to have a plan. And it has to be a not just a paper plan, but a real plan, meaning that we head down this direction. One of two things can happen. If it goes this way, how do we respond? If it goes this way, how to respond? How do we get it back into the direction we want to go, et cetera? A real plan that has flexibility built into it for changing situations. So Russia has prepared for everything, literally prepared for everything, which tells me they're not manipulating anything for the short term, that they have a long-range strategic plan that is premised on the notion that the ruble is going to become a stable economy of global commerce, strong enough to supplant the dollar, at least in the economies that Russia wants to target. Russia has done something very clever. I mean, how many people before this crisis thought that that Putin would link the ruble to the gold standard?
Mm-hmm.
But it happened. And it was a genius move, because now the ruble, believe it or not, is dictating it, because the price of gold used to be linked to the dollar.
Right.
I mean, it's all based upon the dollar. But now by saying that, I think it's 5,000 rubles are worth a half a gram of gold or something like that, that value doesn't change. At the end of the day, 5,000 rubles are worth this much gold. And so now it's the dollar that is linked to the ruble, and he's flipped the script. And again, this isn't a temporary measure designed to, if there hadn't been the divorce of the economies, then I would say there's a chance that this is just games. But there's been the divorce of the economy, so there's literally no there's no impetus, no reason for Russia to play temporary games, because they're not going back to the dollar. They're not going back to the euro. They're not going back to the way things were. They're starting anew. This is about empowering the ruble to function in a trans-Eurasian market, not in an American market, not in a European market, but in a trans-Eurasian market as part and parcel of a currency flux that includes the yuan, the rupee, and other currencies, right, as co-equal currencies of joint, that can be jointly traded. No, Russia, this is the new reality. This is the new reality. It's not a game. It's real. Putin don't bluff. Those are three words that should be tattooed on every American politician's forehead, so that when they go look in the mirror, they can realize how stupid they are to think otherwise. Putin don't bluff.
Yeah, the problem is, though, the politicians are not going to be paying any of these higher gas prices or food prices. It's
well, they will, but they'll just give themselves the pay raise that the rest of us don't get.
Yeah, basically. Scott, I wanted to get your reaction. You have 6 EU countries that expelled Russian diplomats. That's Italy, Denmark, Sweden, Latvia, Estonia, and Spain. We were just talking about how Europe is divided, and there's going to perhaps come a point in time where, you know, these countries, they're going to regret doing all of this because it's going to cause their economies to go into free fall. There would be too much blowback. Do you think this is causing irreparable damage? Because, you know, of course, it's normal to summon ambassadors and so on, but, you know, kicking out ambassadors like that from 6 European countries, it does seem a bit, diplomats, excuse me, it does seem a bit far compared to usual, right?
Oh, no. You know, what we're seeing right now is the manifestation of something that, you know, the Russian government has been saying for some time now. Borrell, the head of the EU's foreign, you know, I guess he's the equivalent of their foreign minister of the EU. You know, Borrell and has been extraordinarily anti-Russian. And you know, the Lavrov and others have said that relations with the EU are irreparable. That we no longer see ourselves as working as viewing the EU as a partner. And again, understand, Russia is walking away from the West. And the more Russia walks away from the West, the worse off things are going to be for the West. At some point in time, Sweden is going to want to talk to the Russians. But if they continue down this path, they're not going to have the outlets to discuss them. And understand that the relations between nations isn't as simple as an ambassador talking to an ambassador or things of that nature. It's sophisticated bureaucracies that, you know, for instance, in Russia, I can guarantee you that in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there is a Swedish department that is staffed by people who have studied Sweden, who have traveled to Sweden, who speak the Swedish language, who know the Swedish economy, and they're at multiple levels, so that if they have a Swedish counterpart that deals with fisheries, the Swedish fisheries person can call the Russian fisheries expert on Sweden, and they can talk the same language, and things can get done. It also creates the ability to preempt problems. So if I can pick up the phone and talk at the lower level about something and hash things out, it doesn't percolate to the top where crises normally occur. By shutting down by kicking out these diplomats, you're shutting down these avenues of communication, and therefore you're pushing everything up to, you know, a fewer number of people, which means you're not going to get the expertise, you're not going to get the attention, things are going to languish. And again, if you're Russia, who doesn't care right now because they're just fed up with the West, they're walking away. Because I guarantee you, there's a huge, you know, all these diplomats they're kicking out are just going to be retrained and sent to China, they're sent to India, sent to the nations that count.
Right.
Europe doesn't count anymore. Europe doesn't factor in. Russia's walking away from Europe. That's real. Now, there's some countries that Russia will maintain a relationship, not as part of a European community, but as singular entities. Hungary is one. You know, I'm sure there'll be. Bulgaria has the potential of becoming another. Maybe Austria, but the other ones, Russia just doesn't care about them anymore. It's a hands-off approach. Whatever problems they have is their problem. And one of these days, sooner rather than later, they're going to realize they need to talk to Russia. They're going to pick up the phone and no one's going to answer because no one's there anymore. They just don't care.
Yeah, it's I feel like they're burning too many bridges, and it's really destructive and foolish, and I just don't see the value of it all at all. I really think it's the West shooting itself in the foot, and the irony here is that European countries, EU member states, are so willing to do this on behalf of the US, and they're actually going to pay the highest price because they're in proximity to Russia. They depend on Russia for energy, on trade. I really don't know how this is going to bode well. Scott, what did you make of the U.S. sending a delegation to Venezuela? Because they've been telling us for a long time Maduro's not the president, and now all of a sudden they want to talk to him, right? They want his oil. The Saudis are not picking up the phone. I mean, this really doesn't look good for the U.S. as the global hegemon. It looks like also they've sanctioned so many countries now that they've just burnt too many bridges. So in terms of foreign relations, in terms of the petrodollar, the global dominance of the U.S. as the U.S. dollar is the global reserve currency and currency of choice in oil sales. All of this, the future of all this, it looks a bit risky, doesn't it?
Well, it's very risky. I mean, let me just ask you a question. If I had two systems of payment, and I was trying to get you to buy into it, and one was ultra convenient. When you pulled it out and used it, transactions occurred flawlessly, seamlessly, accurate reporting, everything moves slow. And the other one, some weeks it wouldn't work. You couldn't get money out of your ATM. The bank was constantly calling you, changing the rates, changing the terms and all that. And you had to choose between those currencies. Which one would you pick? And you don't have to answer because I know what the answer is going to be. The dollar as the currency of the world, the world's reserve currency, should be the most convenient currency the world has ever seen. It should be something that the world wants because it's predictable, it's stable, it's again, it flows seamlessly through the SWIFT system, etc. The U.S. has turned the dollar into the single most inconvenient currency to operate in because of our policy of sanctions. The dollar has become a curse. The dollar has become a vehicle of empowerment. And as a result, we are actually losing our ability to influence people. I mean, it's one thing, for instance, if you have a currency that's so convenient that everybody's using it. Now, if I want to tweak, let's say now I want to get Richard to do something, I don't have to shut it down. I just have to make it mildly inconvenient for you. And guess what you're going to do? You're going to say, I really enjoyed the convenience, so I'll make this mild alteration to keep the bank happy so that I can keep this convenience going. Because otherwise, to drop this, I'd have to go to this really inconvenient thing. It's bad, etc. Mm-hmm. I now have some control. But the moment I make my interference in your affairs so inconvenient that it's suddenly the alternative of taking an equally convenient one or maybe less convenient becomes viable, usable. Right. We have no leverage over Venezuela right now. None. We've sanctioned them to death. We've dismissed them. We've tried to run multiple coups against them. We've just basically made them a pariah state that's and Venezuela has adapted. They've survived. They're doing okay with the help of Russia, Iran, and others. And suddenly we need Venezuela because we didn't have a plan B. Joe Biden was letting his mouth roll in Europe about how Europe had to stand tough, needed to get away, wean itself off of Russian energy, and don't worry, America's going to be there because we're a good friend. We got a plan. We'll get you the gas you need, all that. And Europe went okay. And now Europe's going, where's plan B? The United States goes, we don't have one. Okay, Jim Story. I know I told you last year, Jim Story is the name of the diplomat who's running the Venezuela interest section in Caracas, not in Caracas, in Bogota, Colombia. He used to be in Caracas, but not anymore. And he's the guy that sort of orchestrated the efforts to make Juan Guaido president. Now we're telling Jim Story, you got to go back to Venezuela, to the president you said isn't president, in the presidential palace you said doesn't belong to him, and beg him to sell you oil you said doesn't belong to him. And look, Jim Story's a great guy. I know him. I mean, I don't know him intimately, but I've met him. We've talked. I like the guy, and he's smart, he's intelligent, but he's a diplomat, and he has to do what he's told to do. And now he has to go crawling back to Maduro. Just imagine.
Oh, God, that's so awkward.
It's about as awkward as it gets.
Yeah.
And now you're begging. You're begging. You literally have no leverage because we've sanctioned everything. We got nothing. So we're going in and begging them to sell oil. And what do we have to offer? What are we going to offer in return? We're going to dump Guaido. Guaido's irrelevant. Maduro already won that fight.
They won't even dump him. Ned Price, the State Department spokesperson, he said that they continue to recognize Guaido as the legitimate leader. So they're not even doing that, which makes it even worse. If I'm Maduro, I'm going to look at you and say, no, there's no oil.
Well, Maduro. I mean,
although for the
Maduro
relief, it is worth it also.
He has to balance it because he does have an economy,
right?
And that is in dire straits. He has a population that he has to look out for. But I don't see him just rolling over and playing dead for the United States. I see him, coming up with a solution that's in the best interest of the Venezuelan people, and that may include selling oil to the United States.
Yet that for a long time, Venezuela, used to export a lot of its oil to the United States. The United States was one of its top customers. Over the last 20 years, as Bush and Obama and Trump and Biden have all sanctioned Venezuela, that's changed, of course. But the U.S. remains a net importer of oil. It just consumes far too much. It needs to find oil somewhere, and even cutting off Russia, which was just 3%. Look at what it did to the oil prices. I mean, it's very, very intricate.
Well, one of the interesting things about Venezuela is the grade of oil that you get out of the ground, because it was so close to the United States, is, I guess it's our refineries have been built around processing this grade of oil.
Right.
And so all of our gasoline comes from the Venezuelan oil. And now when we shut down, we had to search for either you have to totally reconfigure the refineries, or you have to find a similar grade of oil. And I guess somewhere in the Ural Mountains, the Russians produce a grade of oil that's very similar to the Venezuelan grade. And so that's what we've been buying. We've been buying all the, I forget, it begins with an M, I think, Mazor or something like that, oil, because our refineries can operate, can process this stuff without significant, reworking. And that's why we have to go back to Venezuela, because if we stop buying the Russian oil, we got no other option. I mean, this is how stupid our politicians are, and it's also Iran. I mean, they're the personification of evil. We can't deal with them. Nuclear threat, regional threat, da da da. Oh, wait a minute. We might need Iranian oil to go on the market to keep the price of oil stable, so that we don't have to pay through the nose. It's not that we'll be refining Iranian oil. We just need to create the impression in the global market that oil is available.
Right.
And suddenly, we were at an impasse in the JCPOA negotiations, and now, we're like, oh no, we're good. Let's go. We're ready to rock. We're even considering lifting the foreign terrorist organization label on the Revolutionary Guard. Imagine that.
Right. That's the big fish that the Iranians have wanted, lifting the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
And they may not get it, but they may. But the point is, if it weren't for the stupidity of our sanction policy against Russia, they never would have gotten it.
Yeah, that's true.
Now it's a possibility because the United States has no fallback position.
Man,
personally, I think it's a good idea, but my point is, if you're going to have policies that that implies you're not a serious nation. If you're sanctioning somebody, making their people suffer, et cetera, and suddenly because of a simple economic click, you go a 180. Right. You're not a serious nation if that happens. Your policies must be linked to a principle.
Yep.
Not the principle of appeasing Saudi Arabia or appeasing Israel, a national security imperative. But if we can flip on Venezuela and flip on Iran, that means we're not a serious nation. We're just not a serious nation.
Scott, I wanted to ask you about this Zelensky quote. He said that he wants to see Ukraine turn into a big Israel, right? He said that we will not be surprised that we'll have representatives of the armed forces, of the National Guard in all institutions and supermarkets and cinemas, and there will be people with weapons. What does that mean? He wants to turn into a big Israel. What do you make of that?
I think he's basically saying that Israel is a small nation that exists among larger nations and is a regional superpower because of their military strength. And so he wants to become a power that's dependent upon nobody. NATO betrayed him. NATO absolutely betrayed him, and he can no longer rely on NATO. And Russia invaded him, so he can't rely on Russia. And I think he lives in a fantasy world where he thinks that somehow the non-existent battlefield successes that he's convinced himself that he is that they have gained, is going to result in him being able to dictate this fantasy outcome.
But Scott,
Zelensky's either going to be dead or in prison, so it doesn't matter.
Well, why do you think the Israelis won't give him the Iron Dome?
Well, first of all, because no Ukrainians trained on it. Second of all, because it will, the Iron Dome is designed to shoot down Hamas rockets and
right.
and rockets, unsophisticated rockets fired out of Lebanon. But the moment you fire, Kinzhal at it, it's over, man. Boom, it's gone. So it's just an expensive waste of money to send it to Ukraine. You can't solve this. Again, you have General Wesley Clark on CNN talking about how important it is that we get 70 old T-72 tanks and 50, 60 old BMP fighting vehicles out of the the former Warsaw Pact nations, and we turn them over to the Ukrainians at a time when the Ukrainians have lost 1,980 tanks and armored fighting vehicles. So he thinks that somehow sending 110, 120 vehicles is going to change the outcome of this fight. None of them will make it. First of all, I'm surprised if anything can start right now. Have they been maintained properly? If I were the Ukrainians, I wouldn't accept these. They're death traps. Are the engines going to freeze? What's the maintenance record? Does anything work? Does the loading system work? Et cetera, et cetera. Do they have night vision capability, or at night do they just become a glowing piece of metal that'll be picked up by a drone with infrared capability and a missile will take it out? So, and none of them make it from the Polish border or wherever they're coming across to the battlefield to begin with, because you got to load them on trains. The trains will be blown up, or you got to load them on heavy equipment trailers. They're going to be blown up, or you're going to drive them on open road and they're going to be blown up. So, there's this fantasy that somehow the West can provide Ukraine with the military means necessary to prevail in this conflict. That's just not going to happen. Ukraine has lost the war. The war is over. You're going to see more and more mass surrendering of Ukrainian troops going forward because they are out of fuel, they are out of ammunition, they're hungry, they're cold, they're tired, they can't communicate. And eventually their hands are going to go up and they're going to surrender. We've seen the surrender of elite Marine units in Mariupol. And we're going to see the surrender of less elite units throughout, especially once the pincer closes in eastern Ukraine. And you have 60 to 100,000 Ukrainian troops realizing that they only have two choices: fight and die, or surrender.
Well, Scott, you're engaging in wrongthink, and I think we can all see why they banned you from Twitter, because you say uncomfortable truths, or as we were discussing earlier, you at least provoke or stimulate critical thinking skills, and that is, completely verboten in this day and age. Scott, any closing remarks? I know I've kept you on for so long, but I'm really grateful we got to pick your brain. Anything else you wanted to add that we didn't touch on? This Twitter ban that they've done against you, where can people follow you? I've pulled up your Telegram. Is this the correct one? Let me put it up on the screen.
That's me.
Okay, so
that's it.
So it's t.me/Scott Ritter, and I will paste it in the chat so people can just click on it directly. Anything else besides Telegram where people can follow you?
That's it. I mean, I don't have a huge social media profile yet, so I may never get one because I'll just get banned. But but no, hey, thank you very much for having me on. This was again I think a worthwhile conversation. I've enjoyed it. I thank you for bringing me on.
Thank you.
Hopefully, between the two of us, we've generated some cerebral activity amongst the people who are listening.
Yeah, I hope so. Again, we've got about 5,000 people watching. They're all very happy with you being here, and I don't just speak for myself when I say that it's always insightful and great to pick your brain and have your insights, Scott. Thank you so much. I hope we get to do this again soon. And again, everybody go follow Scott on Telegram. It's t.me/Scott Ritter, and I'm gonna copy paste that in the chat. There's literally so many people saying thank you. The chat is just exploding. I cannot even read all the messages. It's quite overwhelming.
Thanks, and have a good night. Get some sleep.
Yep, we'll do it. Thank you, Scott. We'll talk later. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Scott Ritter, everybody. Let me show you again his Telegram. Definitely go follow him. Honestly, it's scandalous, right? It's